for expressing an interest in this afternoon's Petitions Committee debate. I beg to move that this House has considered e-petition 300105, entitled Introduce Mandatory Ethnicity Pay Gap Reporting. If I could begin with a prayer of this petition, which states, and I quote, "Much like the existing mandatory requirements for employers with 250 or more employees must publish their gender pay gap, we call upon the government to introduce the Ethnicity Pay Gap Reporting, to shine a light on race and ethnic-based inequality in the workplace so that they can be addressed. Currently, there is a lack of available data engaging the ethnicity pay gap in the workplace. Introducing these measures will allow employers to be held accountable in closing the gap where there is a disparity. In order to achieve a fairer workplace, publishing this data is one of the next steps to knowing how extensive the issues are from a race and ethnicity perspective, and not just through the lens of gender." This petition closed with 130,567 signatures, including 355 from my own Carshalton and Wallington constituency. And in advance of today's debate, I would like to thank the petition creator for taking the time to talk to me about why they started this petition, but also organisations like NatWest, Lloyds and Barclays, who took the time to speak to me about their experience of ethnicity pay gap reporting in their own organisations, and I'll go on to talk about this a little bit later. I would also like to thank the independent statistician Nigel Marriott for his very helpful briefing note and his thoughts, which members can view on his website. Now, Mr Hoti, there has been many calls in support of an ethnicity pay gap reporting, and this request is not something new or born out of this petition. It's been around for some time. And even the April 2021 Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities also found that pay gap reporting is a potentially useful tool. But if we go back to 2018, when my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, was Prime Minister, she launched a consultation on this issue. And the stated aim of the consultation at that time was with the aim of helping employers identify barriers and enable a fairer and more diverse workplace, a move at the time that was welcomed by both the CBI and the Equality and Human Rights Commission, along with businesses, charities, academics and beyond. Now, all of these, including the petition creator and those who briefed me prior to today's debate, made the case that ethnicity pay gap reporting, much like gender pay gap reporting, could help businesses understand their workforce better, identify barriers to equality, and create action plans to tackle those barriers. And, of course, it would help inform government as to the reality of pay gaps and consider the action they can take if needed. Now, I'm sure colleagues from across the House will go into greater detail about the benefits of pay gap reporting throughout their contributions, so I won't steal everyone's material in my opening speech. But I would just like to draw attention to an example of an existing system of pay gap reporting in the UK, which of course relates to gender. In a blog published by the LSE in March this year, it was found that gender pay gap reporting has indeed been effective in its aim of narrowing the gap. The difference between men and women's pay has shrunk by just under a fifth during this time, and it has affected employers due to the fact, according to the blog, that female workers show a strong aversion to employers that have high pay gap reporting, suggesting that organisations have felt compelled to make changes in order to attract and retrain workers. So one would hope that this would be the same in the case of ethnicity pay gaps. And indeed, speaking to some of these organisations, such as the three large banks that I mentioned in my opening remarks, it is very clear from talking to them that this has taught their businesses a lot, and it has helped inform their action plans to create more equal workplaces. However, as the government did identify in their response to this petition, it is true that there are some complications to this reporting that will need to be overcome before proposals can be brought forward. Now, these have been explained, very ably explained by Nigel Marriott in his briefing note, and I do just want to touch on a few of them here. And I must stress that these are not arguments against ethnicity pay gap reporting, but just an identification of what the government will have to consider before bringing forward any proposals. The first thing to mention is that whilst it might seem easy to go straight to gender pay gap reporting as the kind of the word I'm looking for, Mr. Hosey, is template. This template that I'm looking for, thank you very much for being patient with me, for ethnicity pay gap reporting. It's not just as simple as being able to replicate that for a number of reasons. Now, gender pay gap reporting is supported by the fact that it's largely binary, although not exclusively, but given how big that discussion is, I think we'll save that for another day. And it's more or less evenly distributed across the country, whereas ethnicity breakdown in the population can alter drastically depending on where you are and can fall into a much larger number of categories. And this then presents a number of data protection issues because, of course, data of this kind must never reveal inadvertently the identity of the person that it's supposed to be reporting about. So, for example, a small business in a predominantly white community could inadvertently be revealing information about employees' pay when for just one of their employees, for example. And then there is the difficulty of how you disaggregate this data in the first place, i.e. what categories or descriptions do you use, and how do you truly reflect your employees' wishes and how they prefer to be identified. Finally, this is made all the more difficult when you consider the issue of disclosure, where it's estimated something between 5 and 40% of employees do not disclose their ethnicity. Now, again, these are not arguments against ethnicity pay gap reporting. It's just important to raise them here and consider how we overcome them in order to bring forward proposals. It may be that we look only to businesses over a certain number of employees or report on an industry level rather than an individual employer level, for example. But if I could perhaps suggest to the Minister, as he and I are both London MPs, I would suggest that London is the perfect place to trial such a scheme before rolling it out countrywide. Either way, I do hope that the government is considering this carefully. I note from their written response that they are looking to publish their analysis of the 2018 consultation later this year, so any further information as to the date of that publication and any plans to bring forward such proposals would be very welcome indeed. But I will end my remarks there, Mr. Hosey, and hand over to the rest of my colleagues.